Boys are more likely to speak up in class, whether they're called on or not, and sometimes even if they don't know much about the topic. I'm laughing because, like, absolutely.
So many flashbacks flashing in.
It keeps coming. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy and that guy and that guy.
Welcome to the Scaries, brought to you by Racer Co. I'm Sky.
And I'm Talitha. We are proudly broadcasting from Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. In each episode, we tackle the alarming, inconceivable, questionable, shocking, and scary statistics relating to, impacting, and intervening with the lives of women and girls worldwide.
You'll hear the scary truth, take away tools and tips, and learn about what you can do about it. And the Scaries is an opportunity to raise awareness, share resources, and collectively use our power as women and supporters of women to make real change. We'd also like to note, as always, that the views on this podcast are solely our own, and there could be some pieces that could be triggering to you, and especially in this one, so please do listen with caution.
As straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied settler women, we are very aware of the privileges that we have, and we want to use this platform to spread awareness about the scary reality that women from around the world face in different life situations.
And why?
Because sometimes nothing is scarier than being a woman. Holy moly, it is season 2. Can you believe that, Sky?
No, I can't believe it's been not quite a full year since we launched last November, but still, it feels like a year.
It feels like a couple years have happened. We had a very wild summer. We like to try take summers off, but in true us form, we did not at all.
Not quite.
It was very, very busy. Lots of change on the horizon for us. And when we started the Scaries, we were very, very ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, we're going to do an episode a week. It's going to be amazing. And it was amazing. And we absolutely loved it. But for this upcoming season, we are going to do bi-weekly episodes just to save and protect our peace a little bit.
Yes.
Two kids for Sky and one for me. And it's just a very busy time. So yeah. But with that being said, it is September, which means it is the bitter-sweet end to the summer and those hot summer months and all the fun that we had, but excitement also about having kids busy and getting back into activities and back to school. Mm-hmm. Our kids are in preschool. Well, 2 of them are. And even that brings stress and nostalgic memories, maybe even flashbacks to our own school experiences, both good and bad. And as our little ones are engaged with preschool and getting ready to enter that formal school system, I have to say that I've been paying closer attention to what's going on in schools today and just how different the experience is from how it was for us when we were in school. Some ways for the good and a lot of ways for the downright terrifying. Some of the hot topics on our minds and that of many parents, especially in Saskatchewan where we live, are, for one, the lack of funding, which results in large class sizes and not enough support for students who need it. And then also just compounding supports that students do need and that are now very readily diagnosed and unsupported in that way. We have a new provincial pronoun policy, which hinders any child under the age of 16 from going by their preferred pronouns, the pronouns that they identify with, versus the ones that are on their birth certificate. Or gendered when they were born. We have a recent province-wide ban of cell phones in use in schools. That just happened like a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think probably there's good and bad parts to it, but that definitely has an impact. And then also, sadly, so many school shootings, stabbings, fights, and not to mention the very recent terrible tragedy of one teenage girl setting another girl on fire in our province.
And that's, just in Saskatchewan. Or really, because that happened in Saskatoon. So just really in our province. But like, there's so many other things for sure that are happening in Canada, around the world. Around the world, it's probably not even known all the things that are happening. So this is just in our corner of the world, what were the hot topics on our brain and many others in our community.
And I think also, like, anecdotally, we have a lot of educators in our close circles and also hear very scary things that don't make it to the news. So there's that as well. On the brighter side, however, we also have noticed some positive changes, like more inclusive education models and supports for those who are neurodivergent, as I mentioned, and different learning styles. Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action have driven schools to include Indigenous history and culture into curricula, teaching students about the impact of colonization and the importance of reconciliation, as well as more environmental education and a strong push for anti-bullying campaigns and anti-bullying policies, which clearly are needed today with the high rates of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
Bottom line, the school experience for kids today is so different than what we experienced. And it's so hard to know what to do, understand what's happening, and to navigate the most effective ways to support parents, teachers, families, and children, especially girls, as they face unique challenges still to this day. But before we begin, I really want to reiterate our trigger warning today. This episode will be going through sensitive topics, including mental health, suicide, and gender-based violence. So please be aware of that as you listen and do what you need to do to take care of yourself in the best way possible.
Okay, so to set the stage for why education is so important, especially for women and girls, when we look at the research, it's super obvious to me, but I'm not sure about other countries because this is a very hot topic and issue in other countries. But to me and to Talitha and to in our world, school and having access to education is critical.
Yeah.
No bones about it for positive well-being and future success, period. The World Health Organization tells us that going to school is actually critical for growth and development of all children, but particularly for girls, and that education is one of the key social determinants of health and well-being. Sadly, in several African countries and many others, children born to women who have not completed primary education are twice as likely to die before the age of 5 as children born to women who have completed secondary education or higher. And it's not just children that benefit from education, it's whole communities and countries. Mm-hmm. In fact, the World Bank indicates that the more women are educated, the more they tend to be informed about nutrition and healthcare, and their children are usually healthier. They should they choose to become mothers, and they're more likely to participate in the formal labor market and earn higher incomes. Yeah, exactly. And further to that, a 2018 World Bank study estimates that the limited educational opportunities for girls and barriers to completing 12 years of education ends up costing countries between 15 trillion and 30 trillion in lost lifetime productivity and earnings. That's intense. Like, wow. All of these factors combined can help lift households, communities, and countries out of poverty. So this World Bank continues to go on to outline the disproportionate challenges that women face that prevent them from obtaining or completing their education. And those things include gender bias, poverty, violence, child marriages, taking on caregiver responsibilities, and even COVID-19. In many other countries like Afghanistan, for example, girls aren't even legally allowed to attend school. And this is since September of 2021, girls in Afghanistan have been banned from attending secondary school. In many countries, a lack of teachers, schools, and other resources also means many children cannot attend school beyond grade 6, which is so hard. That's just devastating. It's truly, honestly, it's heartbreaking to see such severe inequities still in existence across the globe that prevent women from what I believe is a basic human right and need. But inequalities are happening all the time, and even in our communities, closer to home than you may think. In Canada, girls still face deep-rooted societal pressures and stereotypes that derail their opportunities for success in school. And I'm sure in the U.S. there's probably even more things that we haven't really dug into because of anyway.
It's a whole can of worms. So on top of the systemic and societal inequalities and inequities in so many countries that prevent women and girls from even going to and completing school that were previously mentioned, like the sheer cost to attend school, child marriages, forced domestic work, conflict, and crisis, and more, which we may cover in a whole other episode, let's bring things closer to home and look at what girls today are experiencing here right under our noses. So the question is, what is it like for girls in school today? Is it different from the experience of boys? Well, to kick things off with some rapid fire stats, research shows that in grade 6, 36% of girls say they are self-confident, but by grade 10, this percentage plummets to 14%. 36% is like even really low to
for
start
sure.
off
In
with.
grade 6, how old are you? Like 10
maybe. Yeah, 10 or 11. I don't know. Yeah, something like that. So sad. That's only 36%. And then, just plummets down to 14. Next stat is girls ages 15 to 17 are twice as likely to be hospitalized for mental health concerns compared to boys and young men of the same age. Girls and gender diverse young people face higher rates of sexual assault and other forms of violence compared to boys. And sexist stereotyping and sexualization can lead to harms that start young and continue into adulthood.
For sure.
So it's important to note that the experiences of girls in school are obviously not uniform. Racialized girls, 2S LGBTQIA plus students, and those with disabilities often face additional layers of discrimination, exclusion, and violence. It's the intersectionality of it all. Their challenges are definitely magnified by a system that was not designed with them in mind. But we're going to focus kind of on the generalization today, as that's the stats and information that we could find. So if we unpack the key themes in these stats that I just mentioned, we see some of the notable differences in experiences that impact the success of girls at school. Those being 1, lack of confidence, 2, mental health challenges, 3, gender-based violence. And we're going to add in one more because it's a common thread between all of these things, and that is societal stereotypes and gender roles, which we love to talk about. So let's look at the first 3 themes, and it'll be evident that the stereotypes and gender roles play a fun part throughout it all. So let's dive into confidence. One fascinating piece of research we found shows that the type of school girls attend can have a big impact on their experience. The type of school. Isn't that interesting?
It's I'm looking at schools because my daughter's starting kindergarten next year. So I'm like, and I guess, is Haven?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm already like, we got to book tours and I'm all ears for this.
So, I mean, I don't know if you're going to go to England. I hope you don't go to England, but in England,
not going to England. I mean, who knows? But
you never know. But in England, where all girls schools are still pretty common, The Guardian reported that girls at all girls schools tend to have better exam results than those in mixed schools. And they even outperform boys at all boys schools. So why is that? Well, teachers, when asked, pointed out to a few different reasons. 1, in mixed classrooms, boys tend to dominate the teacher's time, leaving less attention for girls. In all girls schools, girls tend to emulate each other's good study habits and see each other as role models. They tend to feel more free to explore subjects without competition or judgment. Next, boys' outward confidence in mixed schools can sometimes overshadow or even undermine girls' sense of accomplishment, making them feel less sure of their own abilities. I would say I 1,000% recognize that one. Like, that was me totally in high school.
Yeah.
And finally, in an all-girls environment, they have the space to grow, explore, and make choices about their interests and future careers without limitations. So,
makes sense.
Here's another interesting stat. Girls from all-girls schools are twice as likely to study physics at university compared to girls in co-ed schools. Very, very specific.
Physics. Well, that's like, what's physics? Like astronauts, and what do physicists do?
I don't...
it seems very complex.
Intense things.
But twice as likely. That's like notable.
Yeah. So it goes to show that when girls are given the right environment, they can develop their full potential and take on subjects and fields that they might not otherwise consider.
Very cool. And hang with me for a second while I make this inference. But the last point can also tell us that when girls are in an environment where they're not competing with boys for attention or validation, they feel more empowered to take on subjects like physics or, STEM in general, which I would argue are generally seen as male dominated. And we know in terms of career paths are male dominated. So very interesting.
Yeah, I think, it's a very, very specific stat, but I think that it absolutely shows, like, you can very safely make that inference that that when given the right environment and when encouraged to do something like in a different way, they will succeed. So yeah, and on that, it definitely suggests that confidence isn't just about individual ability. We know that confidence isn't just about individual ability, but it's heavily influenced by the environment that you're in. When girls are given the space to explore their interests without societal pressures or gendered expectations, they're more likely to dive into challenging subjects and succeed. There's an article from Lumen Learning that talks about how gender roles in the classroom impact girls' confidence. It points out that boys tend to hang out in larger groups, which take up more space, literally and socially. Boys always taking up all the space. These groups often involve roughhousing and competitive games. Girls, on the other hand, usually stick to one or two close friends, sharing more personal feelings. Because of this, girls can sometimes fade into the background, becoming less visible to both teachers and to other students, which can make them feel less important.
Very interesting.
The article also mentions that boys are more likely to speak up in class, whether they're called on or not, and sometimes even if they don't know much about the topic. I'm laughing because, like, absolutely.
So many flashbacks flashing in.
It keeps coming. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy and that guy and that guy. In a group project, for instance, boys tend to dominate the conversation and often overlook girls' input. This mirrors what we see in society, where men often ignore women's contributions in various settings. Ain't that the truth?
Mm-hmm. I heard something the other day that confidence is more related to competence than it is related to just like a feeling of like egotistical or any of that stuff. And the competence piece is interesting because if girls don't even try something because they're shut down right immediately, or they feel that's a male dominated thing, I'm not going to try it. Of course, they're not going to be competent in it, right?
100%. Yeah.
So then the confidence snowballs from there. So I think it makes sense. The more you're able to empower girls, like in the all-girls schools, to just try everything. There's no stereotypes, there's no gender roles, and then you build a competence or you don't because maybe it's not for you. The more confident you'll be in general. So.
I see this in like my niece, for instance, who sometimes when we're doing something and she's never done it before because she's 5 and hasn't done something before. And she's like, oh, I can't do it. And then she tries once and doesn't do it well. And she gets really frustrated. And I'm like, well, have you ever done that before? And she's like, well, no. I'm like, well, then, yeah, like I wasn't good at that when I first tried it. And so like, just keep reiterating those types of things. But yeah, even still to this day, like if I don't feel like I'm good at something, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do it.
Well, yeah,
I don't embarrass myself.
I don't know if there's more of like a perfectionism complex in girls.
Oh,
too,
totally. I imagine
that makes them also like stop quicker. Yeah. And I don't know. Interesting. Very
societal gendered norms that have been pushed on us.
Yeah, but totally can reflect back on school experiences of all of those things for sure. And actually, it reminds me of kind of the things that we bonded over.
Yeah,
when we kind of became friends in high school, mostly, and we weren't afraid. We were the few that weren't afraid to just speak up and be like, "Yeah, you're wrong. Like, actually, it's this," and say those things. Which, not many were. So
I'm sure much to the dismay of many people. Yeah. But look at us now.
What I also found fascinating in this article is that in general, teachers interact with boys more than they interact with girls by a margin of 10 to 30%. Ooh. So when we talk about they get more attention, I was like, well, why? And this depends on the grade level of the students and the personality of the teacher as well. Like there's lots of factors involved. Yeah. But some of the reasons are the viewability. So the thing we talked about earlier, where boys are more, they're in bigger groups, they're playing games, they're usually roughhousing, and teachers are like, oh, they're going to hurt themselves, what's going to happen, are they getting in a fight, so there's that. The other piece is the stereotypical praised quality of assertiveness in boys, where they're just louder and they're empowered to be loud and to say their piece and to, be assertive about it. Another one is that some teachers may feel that boys are especially prone to getting into mischief, like I kind of mentioned, so they may interact with them more frequently to keep them focused on the task at hand. So again, it all goes back to confidence and the things that erode it, like not feeling noticed, not feeling as valued, or as seen.
Yeah.
So with all of that being said, it's clear that mental health of young girls is taking a toll. So why don't we explore that as the next kind of underlying theme here. So mental health challenges are hitting young women and girls hard. And the stats are tough to ignore. So here's the breakdown. Around 5% of girls aged 12 to 17 are diagnosed with mood disorders like depression or anxiety, compared to just 2.8% of boys. And girls 5 to 17 are twice as likely to be prescribed medication for these issues as boys. 5 years old is being prescribed medication for a mood disorder? Oy.
That's insane.
Like how? But twice as likely to be prescribed medication. When it comes to hospitalizations for mental disorders, girls make up 58% of cases among young people. And girls aged 15 to 17 are twice as likely to end up in the hospital for mental health issues compared to boys the same age. Self-harm, well, nearly 30% of hospitalizations for self-harm involve girls and young women. In fact, girls aged 10 to 24 are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized for self-harm than boys.
10.
Yeah, 10 to 24. I mean, that's a big gap, but still 3 times more, another big stat. And while men are 3 times more likely to die by completing suicide, girls and young women are 3 times more likely to harm themselves and be hospitalized because of it. So that's kind of talks about the last stat. So really interesting there.
That is really interesting. I mean, I'm no mental health expert.
No.
But there's definitely something there in terms of like the gender disparities.
Yeah. And then the last stat I have is completing suicide is the 4th leading cause of death for girls under 14. 4th leading. And it jumps to the 2nd leading cause of death for girls aged 15 to 19. Tragically, the rates are even higher for Indigenous youth, which have some of the highest rates of death by self-harm in the world. Ugh. The stats paint a clear picture. We do need to prioritize mental health support for young women and girls.
I mean, I know that we've talked about mental health a lot in different capacities throughout season 1, but hearing it, no matter how many times I hear it, is still so heart-wrenching. And like I get goosebumps and it takes my breath away a lot of times.
And just so many young people hurting.
Yeah.
Like just so hurt. Like, you know, you got to wonder like what is happening in their home lives and their school lives. You know, there's all kinds of things in someone's environment that impact that. But like,
and like so compounding because I think, you know, there was, I don't know what they were like when we were in high school versus now, but I can imagine that they are much higher now than when we were in high school. But there's also so many more factors that
that
young
impact
brains
you
have to deal with. Yeah. Plus, I mean, we'll talk about social media in a little bit, but like social media and like all those other things and like being more aware of like what's happening in the world and access to information and all of that.
Yep.
Those definitely brought me back to our episode on gaslighting in healthcare specifically, which was episode number 2, where so many more women's concerns get passed off just as mental health concerns, in large part due to the lack of knowledge physicians have on the female body because it wasn't studied until very recently. So it really makes you question and think about the high level of mood disorder diagnoses and prescriptions written for girls over boys.
That is very interesting. I mean, clearly there is a mental health challenge that girls are having to move to see the self-harm stats and the completing suicide stats, but the diagnoses at like 5 and the prescriptions at 5, I feel like is something worth looking into there.
It's actually really interesting because I also saw something on TikTok. There was a thing on TikTok that said that women who are like in their 30s are now getting diagnosed with things like ADHD and like that type of things. Like they get diagnosed way later in life than boys and like young men do. Often because it's like, oh, you're just like anxious or whatever else. But it's like, no, you actually have like you're neurodivergent. I mean, anxious, anxiety and depression, all those things are very valid. But being diagnosed with ADHD is like significantly different of like how your brain is wired.
For sure.
So just interesting that like some prescriptions are going one way and then diagnoses are going another way. Yeah. So even on those suicide stats, getting back to gender stereotypes and norms, there's more and more talk these days about equipping both boys and girls with the ability to talk about and show their emotions, so to prevent lower suicide rates or self-harm rates. Bottom line, though, it's clear that our children are hurting and the hurt is at an all-time high. Now, some attribute this to the rise of social media, as I said, online bullying, prevalence of social comparisons, lack of privacy, which is where we think some of the cell phone ban in schools come into play. But we shouldn't dismiss another glaring factor, specifically here in Saskatchewan, which is the high rate of gender-based violence that exists.
Too high.
Way too high.
I mean, it's any rate is high, like too high. There should be 0, right? But
we know
we have a problem.
Saskatchewan has the highest rate in the entire country of gender-based violence, and
of the Canadian provinces. I think the Northwest Territories are the highest.
Thank you for that clarification. So on that note, did you know that Canada ranks 27th out of 35 countries when it comes to bullying?
27th.
Yeah.
So does that mean we're low? On the low end or on the high end?
There's like, we're on the lower end.
Okay.
But we're still in the top 35 of all countries when it comes to...
of all countries? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So not exactly elite. I mean, also, I think it'd probably be fair to say that like many countries are not measuring bullying.
Probably, yes.
In that way.
Yeah.
But we rank 27th out of 35. So, I mean, we're not 1.
Right.
But we're not on this list.
Exactly.
So not exactly a leaderboard that we want to be on. According to Plan International, bullying, especially for girls, often looks really different. Instead of physical fights, it's exclusion, gossip, and manipulation, mostly online. Like a lot of head games.
Yeah, which can get you like sometimes worse than than the physical, right? It's
punch me in the
stays
face.
in that brain forever. Yeah.
So here are some tough truths. By age 13, 43% of girls have been bullied compared to 33% of boys. I mean, I think downright there's just a bullying issue.
Yeah.
Sexual violence is rampant. At least 25% of girls and 15% of boys experience it before they even turn 16. Oh. This includes harassment, sexual touching, and online exploitation. Indigenous girls, their struggles are compounded by historical and generational trauma. A shocking 26% experience sexual assault before age 15. 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous girls. And it's even higher in the North. 38% of Inuit girls experience this violence. Sexual minority youth face extreme challenges too. 74% of 2S LGBTQIA+ students report verbal harassment about their gender. 21% have faced physical violence, and 28% have been cyberbullied. When it comes to gender-based violence, girls and young women experience sexual assault at rates 7 times higher than boys.
Wow.
The numbers peak during adolescence, with girls between 12 and 17 facing 9 times the risk. Even within their own homes, girls are 4.6 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by a family member than boys, with the rates spiking between ages 12 and 14. Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
And while we've touched on the toll social media takes, it's worth noting that girls are particularly vulnerable to cyberbullying and social comparisons. The constant online pressure to meet unattainable beauty standards has been directly linked to rising mental health issues and lower self-esteem in younger girls.
I think there's even more things, the pressures, not just beauty standards, but as some equalities come into place, like, you know, we see more girls in sports, we see more girls doing all the things, and we feel, a lot of us, this perfectionism. Oh, yeah. It's just like you feel you have to be amazing at everything you do, whether it is the sport, whether it's school, whether it's beauty, and all of them.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, whereas I know men, I mean, some, not all, but probably to the highest degree, have that same level of pressure to do all the things. You know, we still feel it into our older years. Oh, yeah. And, you know, we got to be the super mom and we got to do it all and we got to look good doing it and this and that. Like, it never really ends.
Oh, yeah. I think pressure. That's still that belief of like, there can only be one. Like, we're still competing for a spot that doesn't exist. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So segueing back into the violence piece of it, there's also dating violence. So 1 in 3 Canadian youth is involved in some form of adolescent dating violence, with girls bearing the brunt of psychological abuse. Throw in stereotypes like sexualized gender norms, and you've got a cocktail of issues impacting girls' confidence and academic performance. Plus, school dress codes continue to unfairly target girls and marginalized students, reinforcing outdated gender stereotypes.
Oh, those dress codes still bug me.
They're just so annoying. The fact that I still see things on the news, like about dress codes, or you like see it like circulating on social media, and you're like, seriously? Yeah. Like a spaghetti strap when it's 40 million degrees outside.
You know what? I saw something posted recently with the back to school, and it was on, so I think it was LinkedIn, and there was a school in the States did a big whole spiel about what you should wear when you come back to school. And when the people looked into it, and we look into this in general, the spaghetti straps and all of that isn't about the temptation for young boys. It's about the temptation for teachers.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure it maybe tempts the young boys too, but the bigger temptation is for the teachers, of which this is like a huge issue if they cross that line, right? So
my God.
But just grown man can't.
That wasn't even something we listed.
Yeah.
But that is something
I had to say that because I was like, ooh, when I read that online. Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah. And I think that we're also seeing more and more stories of those types of things as well. But anyways, so that's disgusting. But while these numbers are staggering, they aren't just statistics. Every single one of these figures represents a girl or a young woman whose life is changed forever. And if we don't act now, these numbers will continue to rise. So the takeaway, addressing gender-based violence in schools isn't just a girls' issue, quote unquote. Everyone plays a crucial role in reshaping our communities, and the whole system needs to step up to stop the cycle of violence.
Yes. And while this episode was intended to be a little bit lighter, just to start back into season 2, I think we started actually season 1. The first episode was about domestic violence.
That's exactly
and intimate
what it
partner
was.
violence. So we're starting season 2 is in a similar vein, but we covered a lot of heavy things today. And honestly, this is just like the tip of the iceberg of things that we could have gotten into in terms of back to school and what's happening in school. So likely we'll see more episodes on this, but we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about now, as we always do at the end of our episodes, about what you can do, what we as parents and friends and people in the networks around kids can do to support and make a change for the better for the future for schools and everyone in them. So first and foremost, as always, advocacy and engagement. Get informed about these issues as you are by listening to this. Talk to your school, figure out the school that your kids go to or maybe are going to in the future, and look into like what are their bullying policies. I honestly, after making this episode, I have a list of questions that I'm asking on tours for my kids' kindergarten.
Yeah, good.
Because I'm like, what is the bullying policies? What are those things?
Yeah.
What's happening?
How are you keeping my child safe?
Exactly. Start conversations with policymakers. We're in the midst of an election where we are happening right away here. And I know in lots of places they're having elections as well. So now is the time to ask those tough questions. What are you doing for schools? What are we doing to stop all these issues? What do kids need? What are the resources? What do teachers need? And we know in our province, that's a big one. And that's been a hot topic for the last year, really. Advocating for gender inclusive curriculum, just more comprehensive mental health programs, zero tolerance policies on harassment. All of these things are super important to make a huge change that we need to see to help our youth. And what benefits the children, not just the system. So think about that a little bit. And if you're feeling bold, consider running for elective positions. And that doesn't have to be in politics. That could be school councils and school boards and even municipal or provincial level if you'd like to go there. When you look at the Nordic countries, as always, our famed Nordic
gold
countries,
star.
yes, they have 45% of their parliaments are women, leading to real progress on gender equity. They have the highest rates of gender equality of all those Nordic countries. Yeah. So we need that kind of representation as well to shape our laws, our policies, our boards everywhere to truly support our kids, especially our girls.
Yeah. And we know that when women take on leadership roles, the focus often shifts to more inclusive policies. Like it's
a fact.
In the literature, it's in the research, it's a fact. Women leaders tend to prioritize equity and mental health and anti-bullying efforts, creating a supportive environment that benefits everyone, but specifically students in this case. And more representation obviously leads to more change, especially for girls and marginalized groups.
And providing support for school challenges starts at home. So if you suspect your child is being bullied, approach them with empathy. Ask them how they're feeling. Listen, of course. Empower them to take a stand up for themselves in a safe way. Always work with the school and the teachers and the principals and the counselors. They have lots of resources to help. But bottom line is they need to know what's going on. You need to go what's going on to support your child and build their confidence and self-esteem and kind of rebuild that by focusing on the things that they love and helping them build those competencies in new things or existing things. And a big one that I think is huge is friends. Who are they friends with? Friends make a huge impact on the direction people go in their life and the things that you get exposed to or don't. So look around. Who are their friends? Who are their friends' parents? What kind of role models do they have? Because that is a huge factor.
Isn't that like a thing even like into adulthood is like you are a reflection of like the 5 people 100%. That you hang out the most with?
Yep. So it's the same with kids.
Yeah.
Right. And when we think about bullying and with our kids, there's also microaggressions. So this is another form of harm that starts early. A lot of it is in those ingrained ways that we are raised or what we hear our parents and our grandparents say, which are often very, traditional ways of thinking in some situations. So make sure you catch those. Address them, talk about what they mean, how to stop them, how to course correct.
Right.
Volunteering is another good one. Volunteer at your kid's school. If you're wondering what's happening, be there. Be boots on the ground and see what's happening. You know, you can help out with sports events, food programs, you name it. There's always things happening and they always need more help. So that's one way to support them and everyone wins. And to truly be a support for girls in the classroom, and at the bottom line, we need to address both academic and social factors. We need to encourage girls to be in all subjects like they do in those all-girls schools, especially STEM, where we have that lack of presence and underrepresentation of girls. And provide strong role models that they can look up to. Build their confidence by giving them leadership opportunities and challenge the gender stereotypes that exist in schools, especially those dress codes. Schools should be safe and inclusive spaces, so we need to address harassment and bullying immediately, and we cannot understate that enough. And honestly, provide the academic and emotional support that they need, bottom line. So for educators listening, we know you have way too much going on the already, and you're doing a lot more than your degree signed up for, than you're getting paid for. But this is an opportunity to reflect on how gender dynamics play out in your classroom. Take a second to think about what you do, how you address, and if you maybe do or not address girls different than boys, who's taking up space, you know, how you can maybe think about things differently in your own classrooms, whose achievements are being celebrated, and how can we create a more balanced, inclusive space for all students. Bottom line, again, there's several bottom lines here, but changing the stats starts with us. Always, with the parents, with the teachers, with the environment, with the community. It's about showing up, speaking out, creating environments where all kids, especially girls, can thrive. And together we can challenge these numbers and build a better future. So let's make sure that next generation has the tools, the support, and the confidence they need to succeed.
Whew. Woo! Happy episode 1 of season 2. We did it. Cheers.
Cheers, a water cheers.
Just a water cheers today
this
for
is
us.
Water bottles because it's like back to school, so we figured we'd be on brand.
And also, like, I feel start of the year is also
sixth season.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, 6th season. And also just like, let's maybe stay hydrated this year. Anyways, thank you for joining us today as we confronted the very terrifying but very real life statistics impacting women and girls, specifically girls in school. Please share this episode, rate and subscribe wherever you are listening, and stay tuned for more ways to make a positive impact. Together, we can make the world a little less scary for women and girls.
Follow us on Instagram at RacerCo and Scaries.podcast, and on TikTok at RacerCo. And remember that change starts with awareness and action. Thank you for being a part of the Scaries community and making this world a little less scary to exist as a woman.
Bye.
Bye.